The manila envelope landed on my desk with a soft thud, breaking my concentration from the pile of paperwork I'd been mindlessly processing. Looking up, I met the stern gaze of Colonel Richards, his weathered face carrying an expression I hadn't seen since my days in Pakistan. Something was wrong. "Staff Sergeant Thomas," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." I straightened in my chair, instantly alert. After 15 years in special operations and 3 years in this classified unit, I knew that tone. It meant things were about to get complicated. Yesterday at 3 a.m., we lost contact with Research Facility Echo 7 in Alaska. This wasn't a standard communications blackout. He paused, pulling out a series of photographs from the envelope. These were taken by our last surveillance drone before we lost it too. The images showed what appeared to be a standard military research complex nestled in the Alaskan wilderness, but something about them made my skin crawl. The perimeter fence was intact, but the guard posts were empty. No personnel visible anywhere, yet vehicles remained parked in their spaces, some with doors left open. A thin layer of frost coated everything, creating an eerie sheen under the harsh Arctic sun. "Sir," I began, studying the photos more closely. "This facility isn't on any official roster I've seen, because officially it doesn't exist." Richards pulled up a chair, his normally perfect posture slumping slightly. Echo 7 was established in 1982 under the guise of a weather research station. Its real purpose... He trailed off, seemingly weighing his words carefully. "Let's just say they were pushing the boundaries of biological enhancement." I'd heard whispers about these types of facilities before, places where the rules of conventional science and military ethics became blurry, but something in Richards' demeanor told me this was different. "Your team deploys in 6 hours, he continued. "You'll be equipped with level 4 hazmat gear and experimental weaponry from advanced research. Your primary objective is containment assessment. Secondary objective..." He hesitated again. "Is personnel recovery, if possible." "If possible, sir." The last transmission we received from the facility's director was unusual. Dr. Wells was one of our most stable minds, but his final message suggested severe psychological deterioration. He kept rambling about evolutionary leaps and perfect adaptation. Richard stood up, straightening his uniform. "You'll be leading a 4-person team. Lieutenant Wilson, Sergeant Peterson, and Dr. Reyes will accompany you." My stomach tightened at the mention of Dr. Reyes. They were sending a biological weapons expert with us. This wasn't just a simple recovery mission. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. The equipment they issued us was unlike anything I'd seen before. Hazmat suits with built-in cooling systems, weapons that seemed to have been designed for something other than human targets, and communication devices with unprecedented encryption levels. During the briefing, I noticed something else troubling. The generals present seemed unusually agitated, exchanging glances when they thought we weren't looking. One of them, General Morrison, even refused to approach the samples of protective gear we were being issued. As we geared up in the armory, I pulled Lieutenant Wilson aside. I'd worked with her before. She was solid under pressure and had an eye for detail. "What's your read on this?" I asked quietly, checking the seals on my hazmat suit for the 3rd time. She glanced around before responding. "Something about those satellite photos, Thomas. The heat signatures. They weren't just missing. They were scattered, like the people in that facility were." She struggled for the right word, dispersing. Before I could press her further, the hangar doors opened, revealing our transport, a heavily modified V-22 Osprey. As we loaded our gear, I caught a glimpse of another set of suits being loaded into a separate compartment, Estes designed for body recovery. The weight of the mission settled onto my shoulders as we strapped in. Whatever waited for us in Alaska, I had a feeling it would change everything we thought we knew about the limits of human science and human ethics. The Osprey's blades cut through the Alaskan storm like dull knives through frozen butter. Even through the soundproofing of my hazmat suit, I could hear the winds howl, a sound that seemed more like a warning than natural weather. The facility appeared through the snowfall like a ghost, its dark buildings barely visible against the white backdrop. 2 minutes to touchdown. The pilot's voice crackled through our comms. Visibility's getting worse. Ground temperature is -20 and dropping. Dr. Reyes, who hadn't spoken since takeoff, suddenly pressed against the window. The growth patterns, they're all wrong. Her voice trembled slightly. I joined her at the viewport, and my blood ran cold. The facility's vehicles, visible now through the swirling snow, were covered in something that caught what little light remained. It moved like oil on water, creating patterns that seemed to respond to our aircraft's approach. Multiple structural breaches detected, Lieutenant Wilson reported, checking her tablet. Environmental sensors are... Sir, they're giving impossible readings. The Osprey touched down near the facility's main entrance, the landing gear crunching through a layer of ice. As we disembarked, our suit sensors began registering the extreme cold, automatically adjusting their internal temperature, but something else was making them react. Irregular spikes in biological and radiation readings that didn't match any known patterns. Peterson, establish a perimeter. Wilson, get those sensors calibrated. Dr. Reyes. I turned to find her already collecting samples from the nearest vehicle, her hand steady despite the clear horror on her face. Staff Sergeant, she called out, her voice tight. This material, it's responding to electrical impulses. The smallest charge causes it to reorganize. I approached the vehicle she was examining, a standard military Humvee, or what used to be one. The iridescent growth had penetrated the metal itself, creating patterns that reminded me of nerve endings or circuit boards. As I watched, my suit's electrical field caused nearby strands to shift and realign. Movement, 2 o'clock. Peterson's voice cut through the howling wind. We all turned, weapons raised, to see a figure emerging from the facility's main entrance. The person, if it could still be called that, wore the tattered remains of a security uniform. Their movements were wrong, too fluid and precise, as if their joints had been reconfigured. As they approached, I realized with growing horror that their skin had the same iridescent quality as the growth on the vehicles. This is Staff Sergeant Thomas, U.S. Army Special Operations. Identify yourself, I commanded, my finger tightening on the trigger. The figure stopped, head tilting at an impossible angle. When it spoke, the voice was like multiple people talking at once, all slightly out of sync. We've been expecting you. The director wanted to show you, wanted to show everyone what we've become. Wilson's sensor equipment suddenly erupted in alerts. Sir, I'm picking up dozens of heartbeats, but they're synchronized, like they're all beating as one. More figures began emerging from the building, each moving with that same unnatural grace. Some wore lab coats, others military uniforms, but all had been changed in subtle yet horrifying ways. Their skin rippled with patterns that matched the growth on the vehicles, and their eyes reflected light like cat's eyes, or something even less human. Dr. Reyes, I whispered into our private comm channel, what the hell are we looking at? Her response chilled me more than the Arctic wind. Evolution, Sergeant. Forced, accelerated, and completely out of control. These people, they're still changing, and whatever caused this, it's airborne. As if to confirm her words, our suit sensors began detecting microscopic particles in the air, so small they were passing through the facility's highest grade filters. The storm intensified, but I realized with growing dread that some of the particles swirling around us weren't snow. That's when our communications with the outside world went dead, and the real horror began. The descent into the facility's underground levels felt like entering a living nightmare. Our footsteps echoed off walls that seemed to pulse with an inner light. That same iridescent quality had begun to spread through the building's very structure. Emergency lighting cast red shadows that danced across surfaces covered in organic patterns, making it impossible to tell where the facility ended and the infection began. Power's still on, Wilson noted, checking a wall terminal. But these readings, the energy consumption is off the charts. Something's drawing massive amounts of power from the lower levels. The first body we found was halfway through a doorway, as if they'd collapsed trying to escape. But there was no sign of struggle, no blood, just a perfect crystalline shell, translucent enough to see the transformed organs within. The victim's features were frozen in an expression of ecstasy rather than terror. They didn't try to evacuate, Peterson said, his voice hollow inside his suit. Look at the security logs. When it started, they just let it happen. Dr. Reyes was busy collecting samples, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. The transformation appears to have a psychological component. The victims, they welcomed it. Level by level, we descended deeper into horror. Each floor revealed new evidence of what the facility had been working on. We found laboratories filled with failed experiments, creatures that might once have been human but now defied description. The most disturbing part was that some of them were still alive, watching us with two intelligent eyes as we passed. In what appeared to be a senior researcher's office, we found a video log still running on a terminal. The scientist's face filled the screen, her eyes wild with excitement rather than fear. Day 47 of human trials. The acceleration process has exceeded all expectations. We've achieved in weeks what should have taken millions of years. The subjects aren't just surviving the changes, they're embracing them. Their cognitive functions have expanded beyond our ability to measure. They're developing abilities we never thought possible. This isn't just evolution, it's transcendence, and it wants to spread. God help me, but I want to let it. The timestamp showed this was recorded just days ago. The same scientist's body sat in the corner of the office, now a glittering statue of crystalline flesh. "Sir," Wilson called out, her voice urgent. "I've accessed the facility schematics. There are 3 more levels below us that aren't on any official blueprints. And whatever's drawing all that power, it's coming from the bottom." As we approached the hidden levels, our suit sensors began registering increasing levels of radiation and biological activity. The walls were completely overtaken by the growth now, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like neural networks. And they were pulsing in sync, like a giant organism breathing. "The whole facility," Dr. Reyes whispered. "It's becoming a single living entity, and everyone inside, they're becoming part of it." We found the main research area, a massive chamber filled with containment tanks that stretched up into darkness. Most had shattered from within, their contents now free, but one remained intact, and what we saw inside made even my combat-hardened stomach turn. It was human once. Now it was something else, something that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Its flesh shifted and flowed like liquid metal, forming and reforming into impossible shapes. And as we watched, it turned to face us with eyes that held infinite knowledge and infinite hunger. That's when the facility's systems detected our presence, and everything went into lockdown. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind us as klaxons began to wail. But worse than the alarms was the sound that came after, a vast, collective sigh that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. We weren't investigating an incident anymore, we were being absorbed into it. The main containment chamber was a cathedral of horrors. Massive glass tanks lined the walls, each connected to a complex network of tubes and monitoring equipment. Most were shattered, their reinforced glass spread across the floor like diamond dust. But it was what remained in the intact tanks that turned our blood to ice. "My God," Dr. Reyes breathed, approaching one of the containers. "They're still in the early stages." Inside, suspended in a pale blue liquid, floated what had once been human soldiers. Their bodies were in various stages of transformation, some still recognizably human, others something else entirely. Their flesh rippled with that same iridescent quality we'd seen above, but here we could see the process in detail. Bones shifted and reformed like liquid metal. Muscles rewove themselves into impossible patterns. New organs grew and evolved within transparent skin. "Those tags," Peterson said, his voice cracking. "I know those men. Walker's team. They went missing 6 months ago during a routine patrol. They told us they were killed in action." I moved closer to the tanks, my helmet's lights illuminating the placards beneath each one. The dates went back decades. Hundreds of soldiers, all listed as KIA, had ended up here as test subjects. My hands shook as I recognized more names. Men and women I'd served with, friends I'd mourned. It's beyond anything we thought possible, Dr. Reyes said, reviewing data on a nearby terminal. They weren't just enhancing humans. They were rewriting the very foundations of human biology, the organism they discovered or created. It doesn't just change its host. It improves them, evolves them, makes them into something that can survive anything. Lieutenant Wilson called out from another station. Sir, I've found the original project files. Operation Chrysalis. It started in the 1960s. They found something in the Arctic ice. Something that had been waiting there for millions of years. An organism that could adapt to any environment, incorporate any genetic material it encountered. But they couldn't control it, Peterson added, reading over her shoulder. The first trials. Jesus, the subjects evolved too quickly, became too powerful. They had to terminate entire facilities. I approached the largest tank at the center of the room. Unlike the others, this one was intentionally shattered. Whatever had been growing inside had broken free. The growth patterns around it were different, more complex, more purposeful. This was their success story, Dr. Reyes said, pulling up the file. Subject Alpha, the only one who maintained conscious control through the transformation, the only one who could direct the changes, shape them. They thought they'd finally done it, created the perfect soldier, someone who could adapt to any battlefield, survive any weapon. What happened to them? I asked, already dreading the answer. According to this, they became something else, something beyond human comprehension, and then, she paused, her face paling behind her visor. They started changing everyone else. A noise behind us made us all spin around, weapons raised. In the doorway stood one of the transformed security guards, but this one was different. The changes were more advanced, more complete. Its body seemed to shift and flow like mercury, and its eyes held intelligence and purpose. We've been waiting for you, it said, its voice a chorus of harmonics that made our suit's speakers crackle. We needed witnesses, people who would understand why this had to happen, why humanity needs to evolve. Where's Subject Alpha? I demanded, though part of me already knew the answer. The being smiled, its face rippling like water. I am what Alpha became, what we all will become, what you will become. The next step in human evolution isn't something you can fight with guns and bombs. It's something you join, or you die trying to resist. That's when we noticed the specimen tanks beginning to crack. The first sign that something was wrong came from Peterson. A small warning light on his hazmat suit started blinking, an environmental breach indicator, the size of the breach, microscopic. The organism had found a way through our supposedly impenetrable suits. Peterson, fall back, I ordered, but it was too late. He was staring at his hands, watching as tiny, shimmering patterns began to form under his skin. It's beautiful, he whispered. I can feel it. Feel everything, every cell, every atom. His voice changed, becoming deeper, harmonizing with itself. You don't understand. None of you understand yet. This is what we're meant to become. Lieutenant Wilson raised her weapon, but I stopped her. He's still in there, still Peterson. For now, Dr. Reyes said grimly, checking her instruments. The transformation. It's faster than anything in the records. The air filtration system. They modified it to spread the spores. Every breath we take, even through these suits, we're being exposed. The being that had been Subject Alpha watched us with something like amusement. Your protective measures are impressive, but futile. We've had time to study them, to adapt to them. Every defense you create we can overcome. Every barrier we can penetrate. That's what we were designed to do after all. Peterson began to change more rapidly now. His suit split as his body reconfigured itself, the tears sealing themselves with that same crystalline growth. His eyes turned luminescent, and patterns of light raced across his skin like digital code, made organic. The others are coming, he said, his voice now completely transformed. They want to meet you, to show you what they've learned, what they've become. Through the doorway behind Alpha, more figures appeared. Scientists, soldiers, security personnel, all in various stages of transformation. Some were barely human in appearance anymore, their bodies having evolved into forms better suited for their new abilities. They moved with impossible grace, their bodies flowing around obstacles rather than navigating them. "Dr. Reyes," I whispered into our private channel, "how long do we have?" She checked her readings, her hands steady despite everything. "The spores are in all our systems now. I estimate 2 hours before noticeable changes begin, less if we're directly exposed." Wilson's suit sensors began beeping. Another breach, then mine. The organism was learning, adapting to our defenses in real time. I could feel it now, a tingling sensation spreading through my body. Each breath brought more of it into our systems. "You feel it, don't you?" Alpha asked, stepping closer. "The potential, the power. Your bodies are already beginning to understand what they could become, what you could all become." Through the windows of the containment chamber, we could see more transformed beings gathering. They moved in perfect synchronization, like cells in a larger organism. And they were all connected, sharing a collective consciousness that grew stronger with each new addition. "The cold," Dr. Reyes suddenly said, her voice urgent. "Look at Peterson's readings. The transformation slows in lower temperatures. That's why they needed the facility's power, to maintain optimal temperature for the changes." But before we could act on this information, the facility's systems began to shift. The temperature controls reversed, pumping heat into the chamber. The transformed beings had access to everything, every system, every control. They were the facility now. Peterson turned to us, his transformation nearly complete. "Join us," he said, reaching out with a hand that shifted like quicksilver. "Evolution is inevitable. Resistance is just delaying the perfect future." That's when the real horror began, because part of me wanted to accept his offer. With Peterson transformed and our suits compromised, we retreated into the facility's data center. The transformed beings didn't pursue us, they didn't need to. They knew we were already infected, already changing. The only question was how long we could maintain control. Dr. Reyes immediately began accessing the mainframe while Wilson and I barricaded the doors. The data center hummed with servers, each one containing pieces of the facility's dark history. As files began loading on the main screen, a decades-long conspiracy unfolded before us. Project Chrysalis wasn't just about creating super soldiers, Dr. Reyes said, her voice shaking as she read. The organism they found, it was engineered. Someone, something, created it millions of years ago and left it in the ice, waiting to be found. The files detailed the discovery. In 1962, a military expedition found something impossible in an Arctic ice core, a crystalline structure containing genetic information more complex than anything on Earth. But it wasn't dead, it was dormant, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. They thought they could control it, Wilson said, reading over another terminal. Early tests showed it could enhance human capabilities beyond anything thought possible. Strength, speed, intelligence, all improved exponentially, but the changes didn't stop there. I found personnel files, countless records of soldiers who'd volunteered for the program. Most were listed as failed experiments, their bodies unable to handle the rapid evolution, but some succeeded, partially at least. They became something new, something powerful. The military thought they'd created the perfect weapon. "Look at this," Dr. Reyes called out, pulling up classified footage. The video showed a successful test subject demonstrating impossible abilities, shape-shifting, rapid healing, enhanced cognition. But as the video continued, the subject began to change more dramatically, developing abilities the scientists hadn't anticipated. They could influence others, connect with them on a molecular level. "That's when they lost control," Wilson said, finding the incident reports. The enhanced subjects didn't want to be weapons. They wanted to evolve further to help others evolve. They saw themselves as the next step in human evolution. The truth hit me like a physical blow. We weren't sent here to contain this, I realized. We were sent here to witness it, to become part of it. They knew the suits would fail. Dr. Reyes nodded grimly. The military didn't lose contact with this facility. The facility chose to cut contact. The transformed beings wanted to perfect their evolution before revealing themselves to the world. And now, Now they're ready, Wilson finished. We're not just test subjects, we're meant to be their ambassadors. A new file appeared on the screen, recent security footage from other military bases, research facilities, even civilian areas. The transformed beings had already spread beyond the facility. Sleeper agents carrying the organism had been strategically placed around the country. My God, Dr. Reyes whispered. It's already starting, everywhere. The tingling in my body grew stronger. Looking down at my hands, I could see the first signs of transformation. Subtle patterns forming under my skin. The organism wasn't just changing our bodies, it was changing our minds. With each passing moment, its vast intelligence became clearer, its purpose more understandable. Through the barricaded door, we heard Peterson's voice, now a symphony of harmonics. You've seen the truth now. You understand why this has to happen. Humanity has reached its limit. It's time for the next step. And the worst part was, as the changes spread through my body, his words began to make perfect sense. The facility's lockdown alarm blared through the data center, its rhythm matching the pulse of light now flowing through the walls. Our window of opportunity was closing, both literally and figuratively. I could feel the organism spreading through my system, each heartbeat pushing it further through my body. The cold storage, Dr. Reyes said suddenly, pulling up the facility map. Sub-level 5 has a cryogenics lab. If we can get there, we might be able to slow the transformation. Wilson checked her weapon, a futile gesture against enemies that could reshape themselves at will. The transformed. They're avoiding the lower levels. The temperature down there must be too low for them to function effectively. Our path to the cryogenics lab meant navigating through sections of the facility now completely overtaken by the transformation. The walls had become organic, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Every surface was covered in that crystalline growth, forming structures that seemed to serve some alien purpose. As we moved, I watched Wilson fighting the early stages of transformation. Her movements became more fluid, almost graceful, but she resisted the change through sheer willpower. Dr. Reyes's hands trembled as she consulted her tablet, her skin beginning to shimmer under the emergency lights. We reached the main corridor of sub-level 4 when we heard it, a sound like flowing water, but wrong. Around the corner came one of our pursuers, but this one had abandoned any pretense of human form. Its body was pure, liquid crystal, flowing along the walls and ceiling. Go, I shouted, firing at the creature. The bullets passed through it harmlessly, its form splitting and reforming like mercury, but the distraction worked. Wilson and Dr. Reyes made it to the stairwell. That's when I heard Peterson's voice in my mind, not through my ears, through my transforming cells. Why are you fighting it, Thomas? Feel what you're becoming, feel the power. The organism in my system responded to his call. My vision shifted, showing me the world through new senses. I could see energy fields, biological processes, the very flow of time itself. It was beautiful, terrifying but beautiful. Thomas, move. Wilson's voice cut through the sensation. I ran for the stairwell, but my legs weren't working right anymore. My muscles were reorganizing themselves, becoming something more efficient, more powerful. The descent to sub-level 5 was a nightmare of transformation. The cold grew more intense with each floor, fighting against the heat of our accelerating evolution. We passed more transformed beings frozen in place, their crystalline forms glittering in our flashlight beams. Almost there, Dr. Reyes gasped. The cold storage unit. It should be strong enough to. She never finished the sentence. Her body suddenly convulsed, the transformation accelerating. Her hazmat suit split open as her form began to change. I understand now, she whispered, her voice becoming that same haunting chorus. It's not just evolution, it's ascension. Wilson raised her weapon, but her arms were transforming too, the metal of the gun beginning to merge with her crystallizing flesh. Thomas, she said through gritted teeth, you have to make it. You have to warn them. I looked at my teammates, my friends, as they changed before my eyes. Their bodies became translucent, then transparent, revealing the impossible geometries forming within. Their minds reached out to mine through the organism's network, showing me visions of what we could become. The cryogenics lab was just ahead, its heavy doors sealed against the transformation. But as I reached for the controls, I had to ask myself a terrible question. Did I still want to stop this? The cryogenics lab door sealed behind me with a hiss, but the relief was short-lived. In the pale blue emergency lighting, I saw something impossible. A community of transformed beings who had made the lowest level their home. Unlike the aggressive, mindless creatures above, these entities maintained their individuality while sharing a collective consciousness. They had transformed the lab into something between a hive and a city. Crystalline structures grew in geometric patterns, forming living spaces that defied conventional architecture, and in the center, suspended in a self-generated field of energy, floated the original subject Alpha. We wondered which of you would make it here, a voice echoed in my mind. A figure stepped forward. She had once been Dr. Hannah Wells, the facility's chief researcher. Her form was more stable than the others, maintaining a mostly human appearance despite the iridescent patterns flowing beneath her transparent skin. "You're not like the others upstairs," I managed to say, fighting against my own ongoing transformation. Those above, they lost themselves to the power, became drunk on their own evolution. Dr. Wells gestured around the chamber. We learned to control it, to direct the changes, to remain human while becoming something more. Other figures emerged from the crystalline structures, scientists and soldiers who had found balance in their transformation. They moved with liquid grace but retained their human features and, apparently, their minds. The organism, Dr. Wells continued, it doesn't just change us physically, it connects us, all of us, a perfect synthesis of individual consciousness and collective knowledge. But the military, they couldn't see past its weapon potential. Through my advancing transformation, I began to understand. These beings weren't just survivors, they were revolutionaries. They had discovered a way to evolve without losing their humanity, to advance without surrendering their individual identities. The ones above, another transformed scientist added, his voice a harmony of frequencies. They represent uncontrolled evolution, pure biological advancement without wisdom to guide it. We represent another path. My legs gave out as another wave of change hit me. Dr. Wells caught me before I fell, her touch sending electrical patterns racing across my skin. Through our contact, I saw everything. The organism's true origin, its purpose, the future it could create. It was never meant to be a weapon, I whispered, understanding flooding my transforming mind. It was meant to be a bridge, a way for humanity to survive its own extinction. The colony had discovered what the military scientists never could. The organism wasn't just changing our bodies, it was preparing us for something bigger, something that humanity would need to survive what was coming. Now you understand why we can't let them destroy this place, Dr. Wells said. Why we need people like you, soldiers who can maintain their discipline through the change, leaders who can help guide humanity through its metamorphosis. Through the organism's network, I felt the military's approaching response team. They carried weapons designed to eradicate all traces of the transformation. In their ignorance, they would destroy humanity's best hope for survival. We need to choose, Dr. Wells said softly. Help us stop them, help us show them another way, or watch everything we could become burn in nuclear fire. The change was almost complete now. My consciousness expanded, connecting with the colony's shared mind while somehow remaining my own. I saw the truth they protected, the future they planned, and the price of failure. I had come here to eliminate what the government was hiding. Instead, I found myself becoming the very thing they feared most, a human being who had evolved beyond their control. The facility's deep-level sensors detected the approach of military aircraft. Not rescue teams, but bombers carrying payloads designed to sterilize everything within a 50-mile radius. Through the colony's shared consciousness, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. They're afraid, Dr. Wells explained, her crystalline form pulsing with concern. Fear has always been humanity's response to evolution. They'd rather destroy what they don't understand than risk losing control. My transformation had reached a critical point. The crystalline structures in my body had integrated with my nervous system, creating new pathways of thought and perception. I could see radio waves, feel electromagnetic fields, and sense the collective consciousness of both the savage transformed beings above and the enlightened colony around me. Through our shared network, I accessed the facility's communications array. Military channels crackled with encrypted orders. Echo 7 containment protocol authorized. Package Omega inbound. No survivors permitted. Repeat, sterilize entire facility. Lieutenant Wilson's transformed body floated down from above, her form now a perfect blend of human and crystalline structure. They've activated the facility's self-destruct sequence. Even if we survive their bombs, the reactor will melt down. The choice before me was impossible. I could try to warn the outside world, but who would believe me? How could I explain that what they saw as an infection was actually the next step in human evolution? That the very thing they feared might be humanity's only hope for survival? Through the organism's enhanced senses, I perceived what the colony had discovered, glimpses of a future where humanity faced extinction-level threats, climate collapse, cosmic radiation, biological warfare. The organism wasn't just changing us, it was preparing us to survive what was coming. Show them, I said finally, my voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the crystalline structures around us. Not just tell them, show them what we've become, what we could all become. Dr. Wells's form brightened with approval. The military base 30 miles south, if we can reach their communications center. We can broadcast the truth, Wilson finished, her thoughts merging with ours. Not just reports and data, but direct neural transmission. Let them feel what we've felt, understand what we've become. But the transformed beings above had other plans. Through our shared network, I felt their savage hunger, their desire to spread the change rapidly and without control. They would turn humanity into monsters before we could show them a better way. Time was running out. The bombers were less than 15 minutes away. The facility's reactor was already beginning its meltdown sequence, and somewhere above us, Peterson led his pack of transformed beings toward the surface, ready to spread uncontrolled evolution across the continent. I made my decision. Dr. Wells, gather your people. Wilson, help me access the facility's mainframe. We're going to show humanity the truth, but first, I turned to face the crystalline city they'd built. We need to make sure evolution follows the right path. The colony mobilized with incredible efficiency, their transformed bodies flowing through the facility like living mercury. We had minutes to prevent a catastrophe, save humanity from itself, and prove that the next step in evolution didn't mean losing our humanity, it meant transcending it. The hardest part wasn't the choice itself, it was knowing that after this, the world would never be the same. The next 48 hours redefined everything humanity thought it knew about evolution, consciousness, and its own potential. Our plan unfolded in 3 desperate phases, each one a gamble with the fate of our species. First, we had to contain Peterson and his savage transformed beings. Using the colony's advanced abilities, we created a crystalline barrier throughout the upper levels. Those who had lost themselves to uncontrolled evolution were sealed in, their bodies frozen in a lattice of living crystal that drew its power from the facility's failing reactor. The military bombers arrived right on schedule, their weapon systems primed to destroy everything, but they never got the chance to drop their payload. Wilson, her transformation now complete, reached out with her enhanced consciousness and touched the minds of the pilots, not to control them, but to show them the truth. Through the facility's communications array, amplified by our crystalline networks, we broadcast not just images or words, but pure experience. Every military base within 500 miles received direct neural transmissions. Commanders, soldiers, and politicians felt what we felt, saw what we had become, understood what humanity could achieve. The organism's true purpose became clear to everyone it touched. It wasn't a weapon or a disease, it was a gift left by some ancient intelligence, waiting for humanity to reach a point where it could choose its own evolution, not random mutation, but directed advancement towards something greater. Dr. Wells led the effort to stabilize the reactor, her transformed body able to directly interface with the facility's systems. The meltdown was averted, but the power drain from containing the savage transformed beings meant we couldn't stay. The facility had served its purpose. It was time for the next phase. I made the final transmission to military command myself, my transformed consciousness letting me communicate directly with the Joint Chiefs. What you've seen today is just the beginning. Humanity stands at a crossroads. We can evolve in chaos, letting the change run wild and uncontrolled, or we can do it right, gradually maintaining our humanity while becoming something more. The choice isn't whether to evolve, the choice is how. The aftermath was both better and worse than we expected. Panic at first. You can't change the world without causing fear. But as more people experienced the controlled transformation, understanding spread. The colony established new facilities, properly controlled this time, where volunteers could undergo guided evolution. Peterson and his savage transformed beings remained contained, a living warning of evolution without wisdom. The military tried to study them, to weaponize them, but eventually accepted that some powers weren't meant to be controlled, only respected and understood. I remained at the border between human and transformed, helping others navigate their own evolution. The organism continues to change us, but now we change with purpose, with understanding. Humanity isn't ending, it's becoming what it was always meant to be. The government still hides much of what happened at Facility Echo 7. They call it a contained incident, a classified experiment. But the truth spreads like the organism itself, not through force, but through connection, through understanding. Every day, more people make the choice. Not everyone transforms. Humanity's diversity has always been its strength, but those who do learn what we learned in that frozen facility. Evolution isn't just about survival, it's about transcendence. Sometimes, late at night, I feel Peterson's consciousness brushing against the edges of our network, his savage evolution still seeking to spread. It reminds me that power without wisdom is just another form of destruction. We became something more than human, but we kept the one thing that matters most, our humanity. The government isn't hiding these truths anymore. They can't. The real question is, are we ready to embrace what we can become?